Hello,
All right.
everyone. We are super excited to have you here today to talk about design review transformation. My name is Adam Keating, one of the co-founders and the CEO of CoLab, and I'm joined today by an industry expert, Jeff Melick, Associate Director of Technical Service at BISSELL. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Adam. Nice to be here.
We're going to have a slight change in format for today. Our second guest was Tyler Phillips from TPI. He had an urgent matter come up in the last hour or so we're probably going to do a part two with Tyler. So today is going to be one-on-one or a fireside chat with Jeff. But fear not, Jeff has lots of good stories and lots of good insights. So we're super excited to dive in. We're going to take the next 30 to 45 minutes one-on-one with Jeff and I to explore what it looked like. Why think about design? Why is that important? How did you go about evaluating that was a critical need for the business? And also what that looked like to actually make that change. We're going to leave probably 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. There is a Q&A tool at the bottom, so if you want to open that up, drop a question. Taylor Young, our Chief Strategy Officer, is going to join us in about 30-ish minutes, and then we're going to answer some live Q&A as well. Before I go to Jeff, maybe to give you just a little bit of background on why we're starting, conversations around the design review transformation. My background is mechanical engineering, started CoLab now 6.5 years ago. In the beginning, it really started out of my own frustration for feeling like I was using tools that were letting me down when it came to actually working with other engineers and making product decisions. When you think about today's world, what we're seeing is that engineering teams are under more pressure than ever. Products have never been more complex. And at the same time, there's never been more stakeholders all over the world trying to weigh in on a decision. And the infrastructure and processes and tools for doing that haven't really kept up and are creating this bottleneck now in product development. Our belief at CoLab and what we've seen with our customers is that your most important decisions are being made inside of some form of design review every single day. That could be a package coming out through Adobe that you're reviewing. That could be a meeting. It could be that Teams message or email that you saw. And what we're seeing now, though, is like kind of a splitting of the market. When we started CoLab 6.5 years ago, I don't think many people took design review very seriously in terms of making change to it. Everyone took the review seriously, but investing in it was not something that was common. We're starting to see now this kind of parting, where it's kind of like two types of companies. One that really believes that how they do their design work is as important as the product, and investing in that was critical, and the other that's kind of complacent with status quo. And we're starting to see the gaps compound in terms of the quality of design, velocity of how the team moves, and overall outcomes in the market. So as a whole, what we're trying to do with CoLab now today is help teams think about design review in a slightly different way. Help them take these, sequential, tedious, labor-intensive design review processes and make these more engaging. Make these things in parallel, bring these things up front, and engage the right stakeholders early and often. And that's why at CoLab we built a design engagement system to help do that. Today with Jeff, we're going to talk a lot about why he even looked at this in the first place, what that evaluation kind of looked like, what was great, what was not. It's going to be a pretty open conversation. Before we dig in, Jeff, I'd love to kind of get just the background of your role today at BISSELL, and how did design review even fit into that? Like, why was that even something that piqued your eye or caught your attention once you started?
Yeah, so I've been with BISSELL about 6.5 years now. And I'm like Adam said, associate technical director for our technical service group. So I have in my team, I have our CAD team, I have our PLM windshield team, tooling, model shop, and then packaging group. So it's a diverse group that goes across all our product categories. What started to pique my interest before my time here at BISSELL, I have about 33.5 years of experience within Whirlpool, and Whirlpool had gone in and done a homegrown issue tracking process, and it was loosely linked into the CAD, but it wasn't as dynamic. And when I seen CoLab and how it can link not only the issues, but graphically allow you to tie those concerns and start to assign them to people, drive that through the whole design process, it really piqued my interest. With BISSELL, we have an engineering center here in Grand Rapids, but we also have engineering centers in China and Malaysia, and we have our process partners around the world as well. So it's very important to us to take as I say, take the clock out of the equation. And so how do we work totally around the clock? And CoLab was kind of came to my attention that it would be an opportunity to do that, where people here can put in their comments and feedback on the people in China, Malaysia, go start to work through there. They can start to react in some cases or provide their own thoughts and feedback, and capture this in a more dynamic manner than what we were doing previous.
Yeah, and Jeff, I think, you said to me, we probably met like 2.5 years ago at this point,
Something like that, yeah.
even 3 years ago. Like, what was it like before? I think one thing that'd be helpful for people listening is like, what was the journey from the point when you first saw this to kind of now where we're to, and we'll talk at the end a little more about where we hope to go. But what
Yep.
was it like before? Like, what were the tools people were using? How did this communication happen with China? How did that fit in with the rest of the tech stack? Like, obviously the wind chills and the PLM side. Talk to us a little bit about what the existing state was 2 years ago.
Yeah, so before we started this, and we still do it a little bit today as we're continuing to roll CoLab out through our organization, is a lot of cutting and pasting of screenshots of CAD and then putting it into a PowerPoint or into an Excel document, and drawing arrows and then trying to keep track of all those changes. When I first got here at the time, Office 365 was just really getting off the ground. And so it was really at that time tied to an individual email sending that whole document over. So who had the record of truth? Is it on my hard drive? Is it on somebody else's hard drive? And how do you manage that? So 365 started to help a little bit as we shared, but that has its own limitations. Trying to documents get so large, especially in PowerPoint, when you start adding a lot of those graphics, that we were finding we were literally crashing the system. And then people would have to back out slides that were done early in the project to put new ones in. But then what we were finding is later on, you forgot why we made those changes because those slides are now deposited someplace else. So it was trying to get rid of this whole very manual, very time-sensitive document, and trying to do it in a more dynamic fashion, which CoLab allows us to do, plus maintain the history, plus maintain some other key KPIs that we're looking to implement here as we go forward.
What's interesting about that, when I started off by saying, like, I started some of my own frustration. I had two roles. One, I was an internal PowerPoint engineer, probably three actually. Another, I made Excel sheets that did a lot of tracking. And third is I actually sat on the fence between our engineering team and supply chain and basically brokered information back and forth. And like, that's a very common, like we talk to hundreds of teams. And I have talked to less than a handful that have ever really had a system ahead of CoLab that is like robust, that is clean, that is automated, that feels good, and people like being. Some are better than others, of course. There's definitely improvements. Some teams will have Jira in place instead of the spreadsheet, so at least there's some kind of improvement. But holistically, what you just described, I think is pretty common across the industry. One thing I'm curious about though, so like, in today's environment in particular, deciding to invest and make a change is very hard. Very, very hard for people to do that because it's hard to justify any spend, in particular in 2024. When you think about PowerPoints and the rest, most executive teams will think, that's a nice to have, or it's an efficiency gain or something else. It's hard to tie it back to, you talked at the beginning of this discussion, working around the clock, connecting across these groups, and like there's quality and speed and cost. How did you guys decide to actually prioritize evaluating this when you probably had things going on with your PLM, your ERP, all these different groups? How did this manage to bubble up so that it was actually important to the decision-making team?
But part of it was because of my connection with the PLM and the CAD group. The CAD,
Yep.
I've always looked at if you look at CAD, consumer design, or the graphic design group, and the engineers are a three-legged stool. They always have to stay in sync. So if you're changing something on the B side of the product versus the A side, consumer side, those always have to stay in sync. by doing this, we were just finding ourselves always kind of out of sync. So bringing them a little bit along with this ride, because they're very graphical in nature as well, it helped to see the future of how this could work. So that was part of it. The other thing that I used is the fact that the issue tracking piece, it was very key. When a project finishes and you're really going to go on to the next project, there should be key learnings that you're taking from one to the next. And how do I go find those? Again, how do I go find that Excel spreadsheet? How do I go do this? And again, with CoLab, we're just now in the infancy stage, but the intent is now we have that data.
Yeah.
We have it. We can go back and go, oh, hey, that last project, I remember we did this and we fixed it somehow. We can now go back and look at it and have it, and it's all very, very retrievable. So that was some of the things that that we looked at. The other thing was, again, where do I store these type of documents? And again, with CoLab, and how do I get them across? How to make them a broader across our different leadership? And with CoLab, I can now bring folks in at a leadership level, and they have access to every project from a viewing perspective and being able to see it versus, okay, did I share that Excel document with senior VP that needed it or not? So it's just gives it a central location for storage, data information, and tracking. So
it's an interesting one too, because like when we started the company, the reason we did the tracking was actually because of end user frustration on our behalf, where it was like we were creating tickets and issues to just create tickets and issues versus like in a design review, you should leave feedback and that should create a ticket. It should go in the right place. There should be a history. You shouldn't have to do that work. That's not good use of engineering time. It's actually now created kind of like two other things you just touched on, which is kind of interesting. One of those is that you have this record, so it's good for ISO or whatever. But I think what you said first is actually more important. It's this interesting knowledge play where like, you folks have still rolled out to a couple of teams. We're still rolling that out. Once you get through this first program, go to the next, you're going to have all that knowledge. And one thing we're starting to work on now, which is kind of new and I won't go too deep on, is like, what could you do with that product data and that knowledge data and decision-making data if we brought that together and started leveraging AI? And there's a lot of exciting things that we're working on now that really will go and help take this to the next step. I think what's interesting for me is when you folks did this and you evaluated this, I remember being very hands-on, really testing it out, asking lots of technical questions, which is great. And we're seeing teams do that much. That part usually happens, but most teams won't take the next step, which is like actually building a business case with expected outcomes, an implementation plan. BISSELL is probably one of the most robust that I saw come from the customer. Like you folks had a process for doing that to actually decide this is a good investment and here's why. For what you're allowed to share, what can you share about just like how you evaluate changes anyways and like how that played into taking what sounded like a good technical solution and actually justifying that like, yes, let's do this. Don't need specific numbers, but like process wise, types of things, what were you looking for to make that justification?
yeah, we were looking for time savings from the simple things of not creating the PowerPoint deck. I mean, it's one of our engineering directors the other day, as we were continuing to work into his group, is one of his favorite things is that his team doesn't have to create a deck. It's just there. It just ends up being seamless, which is a big bonus for him, allowing the engineer to engineer, not like you said, be a PowerPoint expert. So that was one thing. The other thing we looked at again was how do we stop repeating errors and how do we capture that history so that we have it and can go back and try to reevaluate. And then honestly, one of the things that you guys brought to us is the whole insight and the KPI piece. How fast can we get these turned around? And that wasn't something initially, 3 years ago, whenever you and I started talking, wasn't even in I don't think that was actually in your plan at that point. But as we went through our proof of concept and got there, we've seen a help in understanding where the reviews are, where they might need help with a group because they're not going through as fast enough. we've looked at it from one spot where we've seen a review and found that, hey, there was a change to the product requirements that
Mm-hmm.
probably should have went back through and had an impact of change done, but the
Mm-hmm.
team was actually revising to a comment of somebody, and we're trying to catch some of those things and trying to
Yeah.
help, again, make sure we're all staying on the same page. So
Yeah, it's interesting now because like most people when they hear of CoLab or think of us, it depends at what level in the organization you're talking about, right? You have a very lucky purview where you've got the engineering lane, you've got also the tools lane, you also know kind of all the other stakeholders. Not
right.
all when people reach out to us, do they even know where to go next? They oftentimes are kind of like, I'm not sure, I've never brought in a tool like this. One thing that I thought was interesting was, when you started talking about the business case, it was around the time savings, but that was innately because you understood
Right.
the depth of what that meant for the business. That means you could get something out in the market soon. That meant you could not make as many last minute rush mistakes, things like that. And then towards the end, I actually thought was cool is like the insights feature we launched last year. We built that to try and give people a little taste of what's going on in a macro and to start getting people thinking about what does good look like. Because in the industry today, what we see is that good, like DFM, for example, if you ask most engineering teams, how long does a DFM cycle take from start to finish? We're talking on the order of weeks, if not like 1 to 2 months.
Yeah.
And think about that, like compare it to software development, right? Software developers are putting up PRs, small incremental changes, merging it 1 to 2 days, right? And I
Yeah.
think there is differences with hardware, but it
Yeah.
being on the order of months versus days is tough to get your head around. It's like that to me was kind of the one interesting part, Jeff, when we went through was like it
Yeah.
started off with time and efficiency, and then it went to like knowledge unlock. It went to doing things better. What are you most excited about now to kind of, what's a hopeful outcome if we look at this a year or two from now? Is it when you think about the bigger things for Bissell? Is it more products? Is it, better products? Is it better innovation? What kind of gets you
It,
excited to think about the
yeah.
opportunity?
Yeah, for us, it's really the speed to market, and then and continue to improve quality. So it's all the normal things that most companies look at. But I think with CoLab, it's that collaboration that we've gained with not only our engineering centers around the world, but with also with our process partners, being able to share that information in a more dynamic way, provide that feedback, and then getting issues assigned to the right people so
Yeah.
that they can go react to it versus, oh, okay, well, going back to the PowerPoint thing, I didn't open up the PowerPoint today, so I don't know that I got a new assignment. Unless somebody sends an email,
Yeah.
this now you get it automatically will send the email with what the issue is, and so somebody can go and start to react to it more in a timely manner. So
Yeah.
I see that. I see, from Bissell's perspective, as we continue to grow in our engineering excellence, you know, trying to look at, we're trying to put together, our product structures and being able to start to reuse a lot of that
Yeah.
information from project to project versus being a project being its own product.
Mhm.
That's something I see as we,
Yeah.
really as Bissell and CoLab are together as a partnership, the things that we can pull together.
That one's super interesting, frankly, because the limitations of the old way is that one, it's hard to get anybody involved, let alone people outside of your group or cross-functional groups. It's always left till the end. That's one of the
Yeah.
biggest unlocks, I think, with collab. It's just that it's frictionless to bring somebody in. It's not a
Yep.
big waste of time or effort. What's interesting about that, like when you move towards like a platforming type model or trying to, re-leverage key components across those products and lessons learned, like give you an example, cost reduction is a big focus of ours. It's really just a fancy type of design review within CoLab system. It's really taking a product, a bill of materials, a drawing, bringing that all in one environment, and then inviting experts from all over the world to focus on the value and the cost of the product. We've seen these like incredible results in that particular application of design review, where all of a sudden now there's this cross pollination happening between people who never spoke before, where another customer of ours in the industrial equipment space, they've got a group now who are basically like welding experts, and they show up to all of the events for all the product lines across 40 business units because they're the expert. And now at this point, what they say every time is pretty much the same. So we can get AI built against that and the rigor with the checklist. You can almost start to automate a lot of that. And then over time,
Yeah.
big businesses can be way more effective. One thing I'd be interested when you just talked about like what you're energized about, when you think about the review itself, tying that to the actual outcome,
Mhm.
what makes you believe that? I mean, we see it, we know it because we can see the difference before and after, but how can you actually tie the review to like, okay, the quality or the speed? Like, not everyone gets that. Some people think it's still a nice to have. They think it's like, okay, if we don't do this review, we'll be fine. Others fully get it though. The mistake was in the review. What do you think about when it comes to like tying those two pieces of the puzzle together?
Yeah, I mean, that's still something that we're trying to figure out how to capture that link, to be honest with you. I think it's intuitive that there's a benefit there, but trying to get that actual tie as we started our proof of concept with about 50 users, and now we're grown to about that just shy of 100, and trying to get it into, we were in a very small group, and a very limited number of minor projects, and now growing that. I think we're going to start to get more
Yeah,
insights of what that is.
yeah,
But but today, you talked about DFMs. We've seen a huge improvement in our DFM turnaround, just from the standpoint that my tooling engineers are sitting here. We have a lot of our projects transition to our
Mhm.
Asia engineering center when they get closer to that tooling stage, and then we do a lot of tooling in Asia today. So just having those three people being able to see the same thing,
Yeah,
provide their inputs, and stuff has been, we've already seen a huge impact improvement in that communication, and turning parts on to start that tooling process uh, earlier than
yeah.
we've seen before.
Would that have been usually sequential, I assume,
Like, so
pre-collab?
yeah, it would have been, again, back to the PowerPoint. It would have been a
One,
whole nother PowerPoint deck, right?
yeah,
Because it's not the design deck; it's
yeah,
a whole nother DFM deck that
yeah,
somebody would be capturing. That then would tie back. The engineer then would have to tie back to their issues list deck. So yeah, there was all these interdependencies. Now we're seeing that we can start to link those all together through the tags. So somebody wants to go through and tag this and that, tag this, and this is all they're looking at. So, back to what I said originally, Whirlpool had a homegrown system. CoLab really took a lot of what I had been used to there, in that when I was a program manager at that point in time, you can use something like CoLab to really go through your engineering tool and go, okay, what's
hmm
my next build? These are my issues for that build. Am I closing these issues? And if there's an issue that doesn't close till maybe later on in the project, you just, you can wait on that, but what to talk about. So
Yeah, that's super interesting because I talked about the bigger connection. The most fundamental change we see, frankly, has nothing to do about one review. It has nothing to do about one person. Like most tools, in my opinion, in the next 5 years are going to be able to mark something up. That's just a feature that's going to exist. PLMs have that today. Browsers can kind of do that today. The markup itself is not that special. Like the actual red line tool, I guess is what I mean.
Mhm.
The ability to do that together in a way that is like engaging,
Yep.
self-documenting, frictionless, like this flexible environment that just feels immersive is kind of that change. And why I think that's actually super important is going back to what you just said a moment ago, is like if those three people can be on the same page at the beginning and you get input from manufacturing far sooner,
Mhm.
you're going to have a lot less changes down the road. I'll give you an example. We have a customer in the heavy equipment space. Prior to CoLab, they worked with a harness partner of theirs. When they would actually go through and do those reviews, they wouldn't actually have the supplier or manufacturer even see most of this until they started prototyping. First time they get it was like build this prototype. They'd find a bunch of issues, do a bunch of rework, and then go to the next prototype build. We implemented this and saw about 1,500 pieces of feedback through CoLab in the span of 6 months. It's a very intense program. They canceled the rework cycle that was
Hmm.
scheduled because they
Yep.
didn't need it, because they'd already had this conversation. And that's where it starts to get to be like, okay, there's something fundamentally different there. And what I like about the BISSELL team in particular is like you've kind of got this global group with the mindset of like, let's figure out how do we be more effective, and openness towards people doing this stuff in parallel. Are you doing, I'm trying to think now back to it, like what types of stuff are you reviewing now? Is 3D, 2D, where in the process, like give everyone a bit of a sense of like, what are they actually doing in terms of those reviews, and focus, and like what else do you hope to be able to do long term?
Yeah, most of our focus has been on the 3D side, the 3D design side. The drawing side at this point, we haven't ventured into that from this perspective yet.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's mostly been on that 3D
Sure.
implementation. So,
Which is
but yeah,
actually great, right? Because if you can start
yeah,
the conversation there, over time,
but
it's going
yeah.
to change, right? You're not going to need drawings near as much, at some point.
Right.
But
Well,
what?
and we're starting on an MBD journey as well, so model-based design. So as
Yeah,
we roll that out, it is so some of that information does come across with CoLab today, and
yeah,
we need to continue to look at how we do that moving forward. But yeah, so we do still do drawings, but we've been focusing more on that 3D because of our eventual goal is to make it more of an MDB model-based design
initiative. Yeah.
process.
It makes sense though. Like most of the reviews should happen in the model, because that's where at that point you can make the changes quickly, right? If you started cutting
Right.
drawings, you've already lost that
Right.
opportunity. Now there's lots of industries where there's tons and tons of drawings, depending on what it is. And I think one interesting part is the review tool in Colab, as you know, works the same way for everything. So it's
Right.
just kind of pins and markups and histories and tracking, no matter what the object is. And that's the behavior change, think about MBD for a second, that I think is going to unlock MBD in 5 or 10 years, is that people will already know how to engage with the model. And instead of
Mhm.
having a drawing side by side in Colab, model and drawing, there's just annotations now on the
Mhm.
model with good view states where they're already comfortable leaving feedback on the model and marking it up. Now there's just more information, versus today MBD can feel, kind of intimidating. It's like a new language, I tell people. If you don't know
Right.
how to speak that language, you're going to go back to something you're comfortable with, which is drawings. That's the language
Right.
most speak. So it's cool to see that that's actually an effort and focus, for the team as well. I mean, one thing I'd like to dig into a little bit, around, like, obviously you folks evaluated this quite close from the hop. You understood kind of where that was to, and felt to build a business case. Talk a little bit about the strategy on implementation, and then I want to dispel a couple of myths, around the effort. Like, you folks picked a group, proved it out with that group over a span of 6 to 12 months, really made that work well, and then gained conviction to do the rest. How did
Yep.
you pick that? How did you pick that group? What were you looking for to understand the early indicators? Like, obviously, like you said, the downstream quality is going to take some time to see because of the
Mhm.
program. Like, what were the early indicators you were looking for so that people can think about, how do I implement something like this and know if it's actually working?
Yeah, like I said, we did a proof of concept around 50 people. We picked two groups. We picked really one group was our engineering excellence group, which is really focusing on platforming parts slash assemblies for us. So they're working at this point across multiple product groups, working with our procurement team, in some cases on new suppliers, so that when
Hmm.
we create this assembly that that it's outside of our traditional supply base today, which looks at our total product. Um, so it could be just a specialty assembly that goes across multiple different product groups. So anyhow, they were kind of unique, and so we used them because they uh, had this total different connectivity um, outside of our normal processes.
Mm.
And they were able to use CoLab again to share data, to mark up things, and to keep it really a nice little tight knit group. And they
Hmm.
found extreme benefit in that, in staying in one application. I leave the workspaces open to the workspace owners. So they were able to create their own file structure inside. They can organize their project the way they need to. And it really helped them versus trying to give this unique supplier access into our wind chill system, trying to create them access there, trying to, have them, create other artifacts with inside wind chill that maybe they don't need to get to. It just was a nice way to segment them, to provide the data that they needed, and to have that good collaboration tool back and forth. Then the other group was a small our portable device group, portable deep cleaning group. Again, another small group going through a project across our different engineering centers. And again, with a different supplier that BISSELL has used before, and it just was kind of natural to bring them on board. They had their challenges, but we were able to show that, again, they were able to communicate and collaborate in a better fashion than they were before. And that's what we used again as more ammunition when we went to now rolling this out into the bigger part of the organization. So yeah, it's still a little bit of a push, but we're getting now more to a pull. I mean, I've had a group reach out to me that wasn't actually on our implementation plan for this year. Said, "Hey, I've seen this, and can we try it?" And so we're starting to get more of that pull from that way. So yeah, there's still some skepticism going on, but in general, people are starting to get it, starting to understand that, really us as humans work better in a visual world, and CoLab provides that visual. So
well, it's interesting though, because like, me as the person with that company, I could feel like, oh man, did Jeff just say that things aren't perfect? Like, of course they're not, right? Like, there's people's innate behavior is people are going to be skeptical. A lot of people are going to be skeptical. People believe, in particular, that we're probably, frankly, full of it as a company, because it seems too good to be true and it's easy and the rest. One of the things we've actually started doing in our sales process, most of the time when people ask us if they don't believe that it's easy, I just bring them in as a supplier in a portal, and they get the email, and 10 seconds later they're in there with doing a review, and that usually puts people at ease. It's like, man, that's like, it can't be much easier than that. So
well, if you remember, Adam, when we started that conversation way back, we did that. I mean, I pushed you guys to use your tool as part of our negotiation part. So we came in. I don't think you had portals at that time. I don't remember exactly how we did it, but we did use the tool. And what were some of our issues? What were some of the things that we were trying to go through? And that helped. Really, that did help in swaying some people that they could see the benefit. So
we it's one of these funny things now where, if you think about it, it's gotten to a place where portals in particular, and for those who aren't familiar, the structure of CoLab is effectively like a workspace, usually per project or per program. And then within that, you can have these portals, and these portals are like a really slick way to pick a certain set of data and bring it into the portal, where each different portal can't see each other, and then you can bring other people in. So for a supplier, for example, you can take data from your workspace. So in Jeff's case, share from Windchill directly into the workspace. He wants to share it to 3 suppliers for an RFQ. They can't see each other, but any feedback they leave rolls back to the workspace. It's a really slick system for like sharing and visualizing what's happening, and rolls all the feedback back together. But it's gotten to a point now, Jeff, where we're actually starting, we build what we call like a mutual action plan during our sales process to try and help people navigate, the steps that come with getting approval, going through IT and all the rest. We're starting to actually just share those with our champions through CoLab, so we can be keeping them up to date. As things are changing, they get it there, we redline, we go back and forth. When we do like a little workshop, they have access to it there. So we're starting to actually do that now. Like, I did one yesterday where it was a 90-minute presentation. There's actually, like, this has been a pretty big evaluation this company's been doing throughout this process. 2 different groups had seen us over time. I had both their workshops in the same place. I had everything we submitted for the RFP in this place. And then during the meeting, the person tried to upload 9 different assemblies, and they realized that they forgot to merge all of them in the CAD tool ahead of time. And luckily we had a little feature that could merge those together. They did it on the fly during the meeting. and that was it. We were done.
Yep.
And like the guy was like, that took 2 minutes. And it's like
Yep.
that type of thing is so important. So I mean, if you're evaluating CoLab and you have skepticism, reach out to the team. We've got an awesome group that'll give you access to actually go in and do something with us in that session, and you'll see pretty quickly how seamless that is. And Jeff, one other thing I want to ask you before we open up some other questions, a couple fun ones at the end. One thing we talked about is like, as a company, I believe very personally that we shouldn't just throw software at people and hope that they figure it out. The hardest part of implementing CoLab for the most part is the change management, just of people, process, culture. The actual like tool, like you said, you can get into a portal in 10 seconds. There's some integration and work we need to work through there to make that work for your PLM. But broadly, it's like getting people to change. Talk a little bit about, because you've got the purview, like the IT commitment needed, the tickets. So we talked about this the other day, and I think it's one of probably the best parts of the story is it, I'll let you tell it. What's sort of been your experience on working with us beyond the tool, I guess, and like the actual needs from your side too?
Yeah, so from that perspective, I mean, here at BISSELL, from an IT side, they keep Windchill running for me, but short of that, they don't have a whole lot of interaction. So when we looked at this, that was one of the questions from IT is, how much are we going to need to be into this? And we really found out through the POC and stuff was we needed one connection for single sign-on, and that was pretty well taken care of right out of the box, no big deal. And then one integration module into Windchill. And for the most part, it's been, it was an hour's worth of work for somebody to put that in. And we haven't had any major issues with it. Shouldn't say that. We had one not major, but we had one hiccup that we found about a month ago. And again, it's a partnership between BISSELL and CoLab, as I feel. Reached out to CoLab, and within hours, we were able to understand what the issue was. We were able to come up with a short-term solution that kept BISSELL running. And then within a week, we were able to come up with the long-term fix. So and again, that was all on the CoLab side. The only thing that we had from the BISSELL side is we had to turn on some log files for a period of time, and then ship those log files to you guys, and you guys took care of the rest. And again, going back to the whole thing when we were trying to sell CoLab to my leadership, when we did the proof of concept, and I don't know if I ever told you this, Adam, but one of the questions was, well, okay, what if the proof of concept doesn't work? What's the impact of BISSELL? And I said, absolutely nothing, because all the collaboration, yes, we will lose some of that data, some of that collaboration for that 6 months to a year. But I will guarantee you some of the engineers already had some of that in their back pocket. They don't trust everything. So they were still doing some things on the backside with some small PowerPoint. But literally, if we would have shut things off, we could still be functioning. So CoLab has been is more moves to that positive than oh my God, if something happens, I'm dead in the water. That's not the case. So
we're like, even the example like where with Windchill in particular, when you roll CoLab, if you're not doing PLM integration, we can turn it on in like 30 seconds. Right. Nothing else to it. PLM, for the most part, our goal is to be able to do an out of the box integration. As you know, everyone's PLM is very heavily customized. So you make a change, like there's always that risk. And of course, over those 2 years, that one instance of that's what we got to work through. And that's just par for the course. But I think you shared with me at one point too, like internal tickets for like support.
Zero.
There was like 0 or 1.
Zero. Yeah.
Just think about that, right? Like that, what other tool can you roll out where your IT team does 0 things to keep it running? Like that's kind of one of the special parts there. And one thing I want to kind of wrap. Oh, go for it, Jeff.
Yeah. So just to add to that a little bit, when I say 0 tickets, and that's not that people came to me because they knew I was running the program to fix it. That's literally 0. I mean, we did not have issues. So, people today probably realize that when you implement something, getting it into your IT system and getting people to submit tickets for issues and stuff like that sometimes doesn't happen. They come back to the subject matter expert. In this case, it was was pretty much zero on both sides, from a subject matter expert and from IT side.
And for folks' benefit too, like one of our mindsets around this is like we should be focusing our time with champions on the next value proposition, the process, the best practices, like the actual culture and process change, not troubleshooting. So for the most part, if that happens, there's a little button in the app. You hit contact support, it will go right to us and we will deal with anything that comes up. Most times we get questions or like feature requests or ideas. And that stuff's amazing. We want to work with people. It's how we've learned. It's how we got the product to a place where people like it so much, is that we've been listening and we want to keep doing that. So I think that's an interesting one. And Jeff, I want to wrap up with a couple of fun ones. Twofold question for you. What are you most excited about, like use case wise, to be able to kind of try out? And what feature, you can put me on the spot. What feature do you want the most in CoLab that we don't have today?
Wow. So what I'm excited about as we continue to roll this out is really keeping this visual record of how we improve. Being able to take the features like you guys just came out with, where you have the dual screen, and being able to have two people look at the model, either looking at it concurrently, or being able to split yourself out, look at it a little bit different, make a pin, and then help push it so that, again, the meeting is more dynamic. We're just now getting into, sharing some of those features and getting those rolled out. Because most time today, they're pulling stuff up in Creo and it's just one person spinning a model. And I've had some ahas going, oh my gosh, I mean, I can be sitting at my desk and doing this and seeing the same thing. And so I think that is a feature that the folks here just now starting to dive in, I think is going to be a big improvement and help. One of the features I would like, I know it's one that you and I've had this conversation about, is what is tying more of the checklist that you guys have in there back to actually not just a list, but how does it get tied back to assigning it to a person? How do you make sure that those lists are being followed and validated? So that's one. The other thing I know that we've talked about too, going back to the DFM, is being able to pull in draft analysis and that kind of stuff. Again, taking a lot of the Creo stuff that you do in a typical design review and pulling that back into one package. So
yeah, the checklist one's super interesting because, I would say holistically, every customer is asking us for some form of configurability in terms of how things are done, right? Some don't want to force it, some do. And this is where I think most other tools go wrong, where they make it so complicated with that type of optionality that it's hard. It's kind of the difference. You think about automotive, like the Tesla Model 3, there's only so many options you can get. Traditional vehicles, there's literally a bajillion options you can make. The level of complexity is very different between a Model 3 and the rest to the end user.
Right.
I think CoLab's trying to take the same approach. We're going to take this configurable approach as like one of our big themes this year on the checklist side. It's more holistic: reviews, checklists, feedback, kind of how it integrates with Windchill, other tools, so that you as an admin or a champion can set some of that up just using a user interface, like no code or extra features. So that way it doesn't bloat it for everyone else if you don't want that. But I think such a powerful one, because like we're getting people say now, like we had one actually tell us this week, don't let me close a review if not every checklist item has been checked off, either pass, fail.
Right.
Which is valid, right? That's a valid rule. If I did that for everybody, not everyone wants to use a checklist. People are in different places. So I think that's a super good one. The DFM side of that is, there's so many opportunities, I think, in terms of analysis, because most people are trying to do the same basic forms of analysis over and over again. Like we're never going to get into, at CoLab at least, doing, like finite element analysis or something robust in simulation. We're going to support visualizing it. But some of the smaller checks, for like draft is a great example, is relatively straightforward, but it comes up in DFM. Like that's the type of thing that I think for sure we'll look to tackle.
Yeah, and I know the last one that you and I have talked about too is, how do if I have a designer, how do I keep them in Creo? I don't want them bouncing between a browser outside of Creo, but keeping it in the Creo browser. And I know that's one of the things that I think it's on your guys' list too, is, again, one tool should be, how do you keep everybody in the tool that they're most comfortable with?
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting for the PTC ecosystem is like they've been a very, very open-minded partner of ours on the other side, where it's like, how do we make this the best possible experience for the person using it? So whether it's tying it closer to Windchill and connecting into, the change process, or bringing a report back from CoLab, or tying the visualization closer together, like that conversation is like a possibility, which is incredible, right? That's what you want in your tooling ecosystem. Forget about CoLab, forget about PTC, forget about ANSYS. Like you want your engineering tool stack to feel like it's BISSELL's, not
Right.
a whole bunch of other companies stitched together
Yep.
with tape.
Yep.
So I think it's incredible. I mean, maybe the last one I'll ask you, and then I see a couple of questions there in the chat. If someone was trying to do this for the first time and you were to give them one piece of advice to help them actually get this change to happen in their organization, what would it be?
Like I said, for us, it was, working with you guys to get a small proof of concept, laying out what we were trying to accomplish, identifying the team, working with that team to get them onboarded. I mean, you guys have been fantastic at having Colin to help me as we continue to onboard, creating some videos, creating training materials, and moving that up. Yeah, so it really was, to us, that proof of concept was probably the most dynamic thing that we did to help sell the whole program, because it got into a broader group. It wasn't just me trying to push it, just trying to do a little bit of what if, could this have, what could this improve? Would this improve? It was more proof in the pudding by actually being able to use the tool and share those success stories, not just from me, but from the people that were actually using it during that POC.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we've really tried to lean into, like most tools might try to sell top down to an organization where you've got, make a choice, Jeff. Are you going to roll call out to everything all at once? That kind of scares people, especially for a new type of way. So like we typically try to take a use case and a group and go provide like real value, but like something that you can scale out from and then go from there. And for some teams that might be 25 to 50, for others that might be, slightly a bigger group with some supply chain or whatever. But it's like pick something and make it work really well, create the culture change inside the org. And then a lot of the rest of it starts, like Jeff said earlier, to be a little more pull than you have to just like go throw something out there and hope that actually happens. Awesome, Taylor. Do you want to jump back on? We're gonna go to, we got 10 minutes left. I see a couple questions there in the chat. If folks have questions, please go down in the bottom panel there in the Q&A tool. Drop those in there. So we're going to go through and prioritize those now and ask those through. First one though, Jeff, was actually, Taylor, do you want to go for it? I think you're back online, so why don't we go for that?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so let the questions come in here, folks. I see our first one here is, we talked about this a little bit already, but what kind of challenges did you encounter in launching CoLab, thinking about from a stakeholder perspective? So really like, how did you approach kind of changing mindsets to help people realize the desired outcomes? So when you're encountering change management issues, pushback, that sort of thing, what was your approach kind of in getting folks to see the benefits and kind of get on the same side of the table with the discussion?
Yeah, so what we instituted when we started this with the proof of concept group was at the time it was actually weekly office hours, if you want to call it that. It's kind of what Colin from CoLab and I deemed it, where we went through initially the two groups, went through it was over a couple of days, but basically about a 1-day training of here's how it works, here's what how we think we can implement this. Then let the teams go out and start to use the tool. And then on a weekly basis, they would come back to us and say, hey, this was some of the challenges we've seen. This is what we're trying to do with it. And work through them, more one-on-one from that perspective.
Taylor, you're muted there, Taylor.
There we go. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, one thing I think we've talked a lot about in our customer success organization when we do onboarding with new users is that it's so important before you jump into a solution with a new group of people, you start with the problem that solution is trying to solve. I think it's so important because, you know, some folks will just get excited at new technology and they'll put the pieces together themselves. And then some folks, you know, can get their back up trying to understand, like, you know, what are we trying to solve here with this new piece of technology? So that's awesome. Next question, maybe you can talk about, and Adam, I think you'd have some perspective on this too. Like, so you mentioned starting with a small team, or a couple of groups, whatever, and then looking to roll it out. How did you decide who was the right group to start with?
Yeah, I went through our engineering directors and engineering VP and brought them on board, kind of showing them what CoLab could do and how it would work. I know Adam came in. We did a number of different presentations, and they kind of help. They kind of seen the vision, and then they kind of help direct us to what's the right group to kick this off with from a proof of concept perspective. So they were very supportive of that whole initial POC. So that's kind of, we let them really drive us to the groups. It wasn't me trying to force them into a group. They seen this is it took two things, right? One, you had to have the right project, and two, you had the right team that was willing to accept change. So, and I think that's where we had the biggest success, is that and how it's starting to grow here is that that small portable deep cleaning team saw, hey, this really starts to work. They started doing more projects, and then my tooling guy from a DFM said, hey, this is starting to work. So he started pushing that into teams that I hadn't even anticipated. And they're starting to now use it in a more organic fashion. So it takes a little bit of what's the right project, and it takes a little bit of who's the right team lead that's willing to accept and to try new things.
It's a bit of a I like what you said earlier with the push pull. I don't think there's any one model where if it's just all pull is good either, because then it can go in 100 different directions, and it all being pushed is bad. It's the combination of having leadership who can help, pick the right place to initially push with a bit of inspiration, and then people pulling for it. And it's part of why we do things like bring people in, get their hands on it if they want to during that process. It's like, yeah, you should try this experience that is not, smoke and mirrors, so that their confidence is a little better. When you talked about this, I think it comes back to confidence.
Yeah.
It comes back to people believing that they can work this way. I think it's a very, very special thing when you get someone that's like a skeptic and converted to, wanting more. That to me is like maybe one of my favorite moments in those relationships. And I actually see there's in the questions there now, Taylor, there's another question about, how do you train new users and teams? Maybe I can talk a little bit to that, and then Jeff, you can speak to sort of the program you and Colin have built. But our general perspective is like piece number one in design engagement systems, it needs to be frictionless and it needs to be easy so that the average user can kind of do the basic thing, which is load the model and leave a pin without too much help. Because you've got folks like Jeff's team who might share to a supplier who we don't know, and we're not going to be able to run training for unless they tell us. So on average, they need to be able to do the basic leave feedback without really anything. No special computer, no special browser, like just click a link in an email. If you have permission, do your thing. That's our bare basic. And if you look at users, a lot are just doing feedback and review. What we do though, typically is kind of a multi-step process where we'll start with someone like Jeff or a champion or a team lead. We'll map out exactly, okay, what's the use case? What's your existing process look like? And how do you want this to fit in the beginning? We'll start with a hypothesis, start those first reviews. And then as we're learning over that first little period, that's when like someone like Jeff and what we call a customer success manager would actually build out best practices. And then that's how we scale it up. So when Jeff talked about 50 people and then 100 people, and now the next chapter, the next 50 or next hundreds are going to do basically the exact same thing. We start in those little groups and just kind of learn, because every company is a little different. We've got lots of best practices ourselves. Like he mentioned tags. It's a feature we've launched where it's meant to be flexible for categorizing feedback so you can see trends and sort through your data. Every business we know, slightly different tags. Same type of concepts, but slightly different tags. It's based on your nomenclature. And that's fine. That's all part of that. So generally, day one, you sign a contract. Next day we turn around, we'll do a kickoff, turn it on. We'll start with a small group, champion a few others, get them in, feeling comfortable. And then within a week, we're usually bringing in the team to do that first review. And then we're listening, learning, iterating. Jeff talked about office hours. You're going to have somebody on the CoLab side there to support you when you have questions. And if you got all sorts of interesting ideas for other use cases, then we're going to be there to help there too. That's a great question.
Yeah,
Great question.
no, yeah, you guys have helped too. We've put together some BISSELLized documents of how to start up a review, what should be in a review, and through CoLab. So yeah, and the office hours piece really does help just to get people's feedback into how do we continue to adopt. We're working on a video right now to get it into our training process, so that when somebody comes in new to BISSELL, an engineer comes in new, they can run through this video and be able to at least do the pins, understand the concept of CoLab, how in general it's being used here at BISSELL, so that from that point they will have at least a good solid foundation.
Yep. Taylor, one last question I see there in the chat, and maybe we'll wrap up from there. Person asked, is this used more in MPD or sustaining? I would say it's a pretty balanced mix depending on the org. I would say typically it's a little heavier in MPD, but the use cases are the same. We have all sorts of teams that are doing this for an existing product that they're improving or making changes. Almost all the teams that use it for cost reduction are using it more on the VA side for an existing product and trying to improve the value and cost versus sort of the upfront VE in MPD. But it's all the same, really. Like, it doesn't matter if this is DFM or co-design or an RFQ or a simple concept review all the way through to supporting a change. It's really all the same function. And I think that's maybe one of the best parts of CoLab is that it's really the same atomic unit, if you will. Share a file, request a review, leave some feedback, work with people, track it, and keep going. That works for sort of all those applications. So if you were in a sustaining role, the only difference would be we're probably talking more about what outcome are we trying to drive here? Is it driving cost down? Is it improving quality? Versus an MPD? It's probably a little more about hit this timeline and make sure those other things work together.
Yep.
Everything else is basically the exact same.
Sure.
But Jeff, I want to say a sincere thank you, both for your partnership and taking the hour today. Taylor, thank you for joining, and Mary, Adam, and team, thank you for helping. For everyone who joined today, we appreciate it. We're going to be sharing this link out after as well. But really, really appreciate it. And Jeff, keep on doing good work at BISSELL. And I'll keep trying to keep my floors clean in my house with your vacuum. So I appreciate you
We
guys.
appreciate that.
Awesome. All right, folks. Thank you very much. Have yourselves a lovely day.
Bye now.
Thanks, Jeff. Bye.
Bye now. Thanks.